Hi team, welcome back to our Introduction to Chinese History Anchor Fact series of printables and mini lessons. In our last lesson, we looked at the story of the Middle Kingdom. China viewed itself as the most important culture of East Asia. It was very self-satisfied. Even when European merchants and missionaries began to arrive, China saw this as a sign that faraway cultures were desperate to reach China too. When the emperor asked a European merchant, Matteo Ricci, to make him a world map, Ricci made him one with China in the middle. Now, it should be noted, this is perfectly fine. Many people think that some maps are better than others. Some people think that a map of this kind, for instance, is wrong somehow. But there's literally nothing wrong with it. It simply uses a kind of projection, which means a way of displaying the round surface of the Earth on a flat sheet of paper. In this projection, no matter where you are, if you want to find true north, all you have to do is look straight up. But that means that the North Pole is always at the top of the map, which stretches out things at the top, and it feels like their size is being exaggerated. In this kind of map, the size of things is better represented, but the shape of things is not. There's always some aspect of a map that is distorted, because you can't get something three-dimensional onto a flat map surface without squishing or stretching something. You just have to choose what part is most important to you. Same goes for choosing what goes in the middle. There's not a right or wrong answer. It's just more convenient either to make a map like this or like this. It's pleasing to the eye, not to bust up the continents, for instance. So, Ricci's map for the emperor is just fine, and it shows China close to the middle, which is what the emperor wanted to see. But now we get to the part of the Middle Kingdom mindset that ended up hurting China very badly. It's the story of the Macartney Embassy, which led to the First Opium War. In 1793, when Britain was at war with France yet again, as it had been century after century, the British sent an ambassador named Lord Macartney to China. His mission was to expand trade with China. But as we can see from this cartoon representation for a newspaper, it did not go well. The Chinese were not interested in goods from Europe. They only wanted to sell their own goods to Europeans in exchange for gold and silver. Watch one of our interview series from Knowable students featuring Kai on this topic. He's a wonderful upper elementary student who covers this topic very nicely. The problem for Europeans was that if their gold and silver kept going to China and none ever returned, they were eventually going to run out. This was more than just about money. Every kingdom in Europe needed money in order to pay for its wars. Soldiers and sailors, and especially mercenaries, need to get paid. When kingdoms run out of money, they simply can't fight wars against their neighbors. So when the Chinese emperor told the British that he was not interested in their proposals, and they should, quote, tremblingly obey, unquote, his orders to leave China alone, they became frustrated, angry, and scared. They decided they would sell the Chinese something they could not refuse, a drug called opium. When more and more Chinese people became addicted to this drug, the British had found a way to get their money back from China. What do you think a benevolent despot should do if his people are getting addicted to drugs? Remember, a benevolent despot is supposed to use his power for the good of the people. So, the emperor put a ban on opium and seized it from the British merchants. Not surprisingly, the British were angered by this policy. They complained that their property was being stolen. The British government decided to send a small fleet of warships to China. Doesn't sound like much of a response until you learn that they were a completely new kind of warship. They were steamships, and they had powerful new kinds of cannons on board. These ships, including the HMS Nemesis, made short work of the entire Chinese Navy. This showed the importance of what is called the Industrial Revolution. It was just getting started, but the technological advantage of modern technology meant that Britain had quite suddenly become much more powerful than China. The First Opium War of 1839 to 42 is a turning point in Chinese history. Simply put, China was no longer the Middle Kingdom. Britain was. The British forced the Chinese to give up land and created the city of Hong Kong, which belonged to Great Britain until 1999. They also forced China to make the opium trade legal again. When a country does this, when it forces another country to accept its own laws instead of their own, it's called imposing extraterritoriality. Extra means outside, so extraterritoriality means control from outside your territory. This was humiliating to China, but they had lost. The question of how to respond to this terrible situation became a major priority. As we will see, however, the Chinese were not able to answer that question properly until 1978. In our next lesson, we will look at what the Chinese call the century of humiliation, which still bothers them to this day. See you then.